You ever notice how people say numbers don't lie? Well, that's true. Numbers don't lie. But people sure do. And in the Trump era, and let's be honest, in the Trump 2.0 era, lying with numbers has become its own art form. The magician's trick where the math looks official, the percentages sound convincing, and suddenly you're being told that 2 plus 2 equals patriotism. We've reached a point where statistics, once the boring part of public policy, have become political weapons. Not because the data changed, but because the way it's used did. In Trump world, facts are negotiable. Experts are the enemy. And research? Well, that means a tweet with a graph someone made in Excel. And none of it is by accident. Hello, and welcome to another supplemental installment of Back Porch Files. From your neighbor on the left, the podcast about liberal politics, human decency, and life on the blue side of America's ideological divide. My name is Don Spielis, your opinionated host. And today I'm the guy trying to keep one eye on the data and the other on the people bending it into pretzels. We're going to talk about how Trump, his allies, and the ecosystem around him, from MAGA politicians to RFK Jr.'s conspiratorial cousin energy, have turned statistics into a smoke machine. We live in a country where an entire political movement has been trained to treat numbers as sacred, but only when they confirm the story that they already want to tell. Trump has always been a master of this. From the very beginning, he's been tossing around numbers like confetti. Rally crowd sizes, unemployment rates, historic poll numbers, all inflated, distorted, or in some cases completely made up. He says them confidently, repeats them loudly, and lets the repetition become the proof. And his followers? Well, they repeat them too. Because if the number comes with that Trump bravado, it feels true. Take one of his greatest hits, his supposed record-breaking popularity. He's been saying this since 2017. He says it now, in 2025, like a mantra. No president has ever been this popular. But when you look at the actual data, Trump's approval rating never once cracked 50% during his entire first term. That's not a record, that's a floor. Even now, in polls that oversample Republicans, he might hit 45 or 46%. But he calls it a record anyway, and Fox runs a lower third that says Trump's approval soars. Here's the trick. It's not that he's citing data wrong. It's that he's using the data wrong. He cherry picks the friendliest poll, quotes a flattering demographic, and then declares victory. That's how statistical lying works. You don't make up numbers. You just rearrange them until they say what you want. Nowhere is this more dangerous than when politicians use fake or twisted stats to justify real-world policies. Enter JD Vance, self-proclaimed truth-teller from Ohio who lately seems almost allergic to reality. Vance has been pushing a narrative that the real political violence in America isn't from right-wing extremists, but from the left. He recently cited a so-called analysis claiming that more political murders are committed by leftists than conservatives. He didn't link it, didn't name a source because, guess what? It doesn't exist. What does exist is FBI and DHS data. And it's clear. Since 2015, roughly 75 to 80% of politically motivated murders in the U.S. were carried out by far-right extremists. That's their own data. Not some liberal blog, not some think tank, but the Department of Homeland Security and the FBI. But JD Vance just flips the script because he knows most people aren't going to check the numbers. They'll just hear, the FBI says Antifa killed more people, which it absolutely does not, and it'll sink in. And that's the danger. When a U.S. vice president takes a real statistic and turns it inside out, he's not just lying. He's reprogramming the public's understanding of reality. It's not really about debate anymore. It's about data warfare. Now let's talk about one of the president's favorite con jobs, tariffs. You've heard him brag. We've made billions from China. Billions. It's one of his proudest talking points, and his supporters eat it up like it's gospel. But here's the thing. As we've said time and time again, tariffs are not payments from China. They are paid by American consumers. When Trump imposed tariffs on Chinese goods, American importers paid those costs at the border, not the Chinese companies. These costs were passed down to consumers. That's you, that's me, that's everyone who's bought literally anything that says made in China. The money the governments collected, however much it was not a win against China. It was a tax increase on Americans. Economists across the spectrum, left, right, center, have said this over and over and over. But Trump world spins it like it's a profit margin. We made billions. No, we paid millions. It's like your neighbor bragging that he made $500 because his car got towed and he paid the fine to himself. It's economic gaslighting wrapped up in nationalism. And here's why it works. Because, quote, billions from China sounds like winning. Tariffs increase cost on American consumers sounds complicated. People love the sound of a scoreboard, not an invoice. Now, let's take a detour into the realm of pseudoscience. Because the misuse of statistics doesn't stop at politics. It seeps into health, science, and public perception. Enter Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the man who could have been a Kennedy legacy of public service, but chose to become the internet's epidemiologist-in-chief of nonsense. Recently, RFK Jr. promoted the idea that Tylenol use in pregnancy causes autism, and somehow connected to that, circumcision rates in boys. Yes, really. He implied that higher circumcision rates and Tylenol exposure correlate with higher autism diagnoses, as if a ritual and an over-the-counter pain reliever conspired to alter human neurology. This is what happens when someone with a platform misuses correlation. Two lines move in the same direction, and suddenly it's causation, proof of a global cover-up. But that is not how science works. That's not how statistics work. Correlation is not causation. It's the first sentence in the Statistics 101 textbook. You could find correlations between the numbers of Nicolas Cage movies released in a year and the number of swimming pool drownings. It doesn't mean Nicolas Cage is out there causing accidents with, National Treasure 3. RFK Jr. knows better, or at least he should, but he's discovered the power of statistical suggestion. He doesn't need to prove his claims. He just needs to sound like he's citing data so that the skeptical people think maybe Big Pharma really is hiding something. And don't get me wrong, there are lots and lots of problems with Big Pharma, but this particular thing is not one of them. That's the Trumpian overlap. Using numbers not to explain truth, but to imply conspiracy. Trump and his inner circle understand that numbers carry emotional weight. They know that if they say millions, people feel magnitude. If they say record-breaking, it triggers pride. That's why Trump always quantifies his exaggerations. The biggest rally ever. More people than Martin Luther King. Millions of new jobs. The most popular president. He speaks in numerical superlatives because numbers sound objective even when they're fiction. It's marketing, not measurement. And it's effective because it hijacks how our brains handle data. We're wired to trust quantifiable information. Millions feels true in a way that a lot doesn't. So when Trump World pushes out graphics about crime rates, immigration surges, or supposed economic miracles, they're not just tossing out false numbers. They're crafting emotional hooks that sound like math. It's propaganda with a calculator. Now, the media isn't blameless in this. Every time a cable network flashes a misleading Trump stat on their screen, even if it's being, quote, fact-checked, they are amplifying that stat. You see it everywhere. Trump claims 80% of Americans support tariffs. Then the chyron stays up for 3 minutes while a pundit argues. Viewers don't remember the correlation, they just remember the number. Same with social media. A false statistic spreads 6 times faster than a correction. That's not a metaphor. That's from a 2023 MIT study. And guess who knows that? The people creating the lies. They know that if they throw out enough fake data about crime, immigrants, vaccines, the economy, whatever, the fact-checkers can't keep up. By the time the truth catches its breath, the lie has already finished the campaign rally. And here's the part that really worries me. This isn't just about bad actors twisting numbers. It's about what happens when regular people start distrusting all statistics. When Trump calls every inconvenient fact fake, and JD Vance calls every uncomfortable study woke science, it corrodes something essential: public trust. And once that's gone, you can't just rebuild it with the pie chart. If Americans stop believing in shared data, we can't agree on anything. Not climate change, not election results, not public health. Every number becomes partisan. Every fact becomes a feeling. And that's not an accident. That's the point. Because when people can't tell what's true, they'll follow whoever feels true. And that's how demagogues thrive. In the fog between fact and fiction. If you zoom out, there's a pattern. Trump World doesn't lie randomly. It lies strategically. The formula goes something like this. Step 1, invent or distort a number. Step 2, repeat it everywhere, ad nauseum. Step 3, use the repetition as proof. People are saying. And step 4, attack anyone who dares challenge it. And it works. because most people don't have the time or the tools to fact check every claim they hear. They're too busy living real lives. So when a confident voice says, "I've seen the numbers, they're tremendous," it lands, especially if you're hearing it from someone you've already decided that you trust. It's not stupidity, it's psychology. And that's what makes statistical manipulation one of the most effective forms of modern propaganda. So, how do we push back? How do we protect truth in an age where numbers are just another weapon? First, by slowing down. When someone tosses out a shocking stat about crime, the economy, whatever, pause. Ask yourself, where did that come from? Second, learn to spot cherry picking. If someone cites a single number that perfectly fits their narrative, it's probably been sliced and diced to get there. Third, remember, real data is messy. Real truth takes nuance. If it fits too neatly into a political slogan, it's probably not the whole picture. And finally, never let the liars redefine what fact-based means. They want cynicism. They want people to throw up their hands and say, "You can't trust any numbers," or "both sides lie," because that's when they win. We don't have to know everything. We just have to care about what's real and what's not. Numbers don't lie, but they can be twisted, dressed up, weaponized, and used to justify everything from bad policy to worse behavior. We're not living in an era of honest mistakes or simple exaggerations. We're living in an age where distortion is the strategy. When Trump brags about tariff profits, when JD Vance rewrites the math on political violence, when RFK confuses correlation with causation, they're not just spreading misinformation, they're eroding the foundation of how a democracy functions. Because a democracy built on lies about numbers isn't a democracy at all. It's a con. And we've seen enough cons to last a lifetime. A big thanks to everyone who's downloaded this episode and listened to it. I'm very grateful, and as always, I would love to hear from any and all. You can use any of the social media platforms for the podcast. The links to those are all on the Linktree page, and the address of the Linktree page is in the podcast description. We'll be back on Tuesday with another full episode of Your Neighbor on the Left. So until then, stay engaged, stay kind, and as always, have the week you'd wish for others.